Hello again. The Thabo Mbeki Foundation has announced that it will be celebrating Africa Day for the first time outside South Africa, and they will head to Guinea Conakry. The foundation hosted a media briefing earlier today to give an update on the annual Mbeki lecture and other programs the foundation is embarking on. Newzroom Afrika's Ziyanda Ngcobo is standing by to tell us why the West African nation of Guinea Conakry. Good afternoon, Z.
Good afternoon to you, Dudu. It is Africa Month, and you'll know that the patron of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, former President Thabo Mbeki himself, is passionate about the African continent, its development, and essentially personifies the African Renaissance. Well, they were challenged by their colleagues on the African continent to say that the annual Mbeki lecture seems to only belong to South Africa, and so by that then they accepted the challenge and will now be taking the lecture to Guinea Conakry. That is going to be at the end of the month. The annual lecture will be on Saturday, the 27th of May. And I'm also proud to announce that as Newzroom Afrika will be joining the Thabo Mbeki Foundation for this coverage. Also critical, before that lecture, there will be a Miriam Makeba, remembrance. She spent over a decade in exile in that country. So there will be several activities leading up to that. But let's bring in the chair of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, that's Ms. Geraldine, Fraser-Moleketi, and the importance of going to a West African country such as Guinea Conakry and what it means to have this commemoration with the numerous challenges on the continent. Ethiopia, Sudan, not much peace in Africa.
You've correctly pointed out, and thanks for this opportunity, that we were challenged as the foundation to take this lecture out of South Africa, beyond South Africa. We've also been very clear that the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, and in particular the Africa Day lecture, is about the continent and about Renaissance on the continent. Looking at West Africa, right now, there are numerous challenges, but you've also pointed out it's beyond the continent. So why Guinea Conakry? Firstly, our eminent speaker this year happens to be Professor Thabo Mbeki, who is a Guinean. You know, he's from Conakry, and he will be challenging us intellectually and otherwise on how to look at the problems of the continent and finding solutions. But the second issue is that we've stated that 50 years ago we've had eminent Africans gather in Conakry, Sékou Touré, Kwame Nkrumah, Amilcar Cabral, and various others. And I believe at that point, Miriam Makeba was there as well, where they met and they reflected on the Africa we should have, the Africa we want. And I think it's hence quite significant that we go back now that Guinea itself is grappling with its own challenges. So we will consider the whole issues of countries in conflict and post-conflict, countries that have to deal with issues of insecurity and huge security challenges. We will, during this week, in addition to the President meeting with the President of Guinea Conakry, meeting with academia, meeting with civil society, we will actually look at how we also can contribute towards dialogue and thinking on growing the African economies. On the day after the lecture, there will be a gathering of youth who will also reflect on the issues that were raised during the week and during the lecture. And then, of course, a little highlight that I can conclude on is that on the eve of the lecture, there will be the Miriam Makeba tribute concert that will have our own Simpiwe Dana as well as other musicians across West Africa.
Ms. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, I think one of the things when we talk about the African continent now, we've seen so many leaders from across the world, the Russian Foreign Affairs Minister Antony Blinken from the US coming to Africa, many describing it as a new scramble for Africa. So what should African leaders be saying? How are they consolidating themselves as we now see the world revive their attention back to the African continent?
Well, the first issue is that we do not want to have a situation where a new Cold War plays out on the African continent through a sudden interest from some in the continent for their own purposes. We also have a very clear understanding of the relations we've had with various countries and leaders. So coming back to our own continent, this is precisely why we have the gathering of intellectuals, of politicians. We engage with the African Union, with the Pan-African Parliament and so on, so that we develop our own solutions on dealing with Africa's problems, including the challenge that's of interest right now. I mentioned earlier this morning that there is a particular initiative where we are looking at the whole issue of food security and fertilizers that's required to avert any further challenges, and this is in view of the sanctions that have been placed on Russia. And we're bringing together a platform and an engagement of people together with the University of Edinburgh to precisely see how we can overcome this. Because at the end of the day, we also need to look at the interests of Africa. And our interest is to be able to ensure our food security. We must engage with countries in a manner that will ensure that this is taken forward. We know there's huge food insecurities in places, and we, in a responsible way, want to look at how best to deal with these issues. But above all, Africa has been very clear about its development path, but it hasn't always been that good when we look at the issue of strong institution building, strong governments, how we'll ensure to have the economic development that we can have because of the rich wealth on this continent, and hence the whole issue of the African Renaissance had taken shape through the new African path for a new economic path for African development, and we've got to revive that. And Guinea Conakry is an opportunity where people sit together and engage on this.
An opportunity, absolutely, but some academics have critiqued African leaders and even those in the diaspora of not consolidating. So you've got ECOWAS, you've got SADC, you've got all these regions and the East African community, but when we have all these other leaders coming from outside the continent, there isn't a clear vision that when you have an Antony Blinken company or Sergei Lavrov coming to your country, that you have one voice and speaking in one voice as African leaders. Your thoughts?
Well, firstly, there's been quite a strong view across the continent that has said that we will take a position that's in our interest, one where we do not want to be seen as taking sides, either with one or another group. And here particularly we've been quite clear that it's not us against Russia vis-a-vis the whole issue of the Ukraine that's largely NATO supported, and I think some may have ventured to call this a bit of a proxy war. One could even go as far as saying maybe people should look back at Churchill's words in 1951, 1953, when post the Second World War he spoke about countries like Poland serving as a buffer or a neutral territory. But I think secondly as well, we're saying this absolutely no problem in saying that ours is to call for peace. And we have called for peace. And we've actually gone as far as saying there's a need for discussion and negotiation, because a war is not going to be to the benefit of anyone, and least of all for humanity. So we've got to find different solutions, and in so doing, let's get everyone into a room and a space where it's not looking at geopolitical interests from a narrow point of view. Because if we don't do that, we may as well settle for a unipolar world. We move away from multipolarity, and if we think back to Bandung and the non-aligned movement, Africa has been fairly clear where it stands. Will there be different voices? In instances, yes. Is Africa a major player? Absolutely. That's why everyone is coming here. Yeah. And we need to use it to our advantage. And this is where the Union, the African Union must play a role. This is where regional economic communities must play a role. Yeah. And be careful about simply listening to dominant narratives.
Ms. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, she's the chairperson of the board for the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. Nothing else to add there, Dudu. Quite clear then about what the African continent and its leaders have been saying when it comes in particular to peace and stability. That will be one of the fundamental topics, I must add, when both the Mbeki Foundation, alongside with us as a channel, Newzroom Afrika, endeavor to cover and commemorate Africa Month in the Republic of Guinea Conakry.
Forward to it. Ziyanda Ngcobo, thank you very much.